welcome to the debate. You know, when we look up at the night sky, there's this deeply ingrained human tendency to see a mirror.
Right.
We project our own faces, our own desires, and our own morality right onto that dark canvas of space. I mean, it's comforting to think that whoever is out there must be just an older, wiser version of us.
Yeah, like a species that has outgrown all the petty violence and the self-destruction of our own youth.
Exactly. But then you actually send a signal out into that dark and you get an answer. And suddenly, that mirror shatters. You aren't dealing with a reflection anymore. You're dealing with the terrifying, absolute unknown.
The reality of the cosmos.
Right. And that shattering mirror is exactly what the astrophysicist Ye Wenjie faced in Cixin's The Three-Body Problem.
Such a brilliant concept.
It really is. So today, we are examining her fateful, central decision to invite the alien Trisolaran race to Earth. We're zeroing in on the core justification she uses for that action. Specifically, her belief that a civilization with highly advanced science must inherently possess higher moral standards.
The big assumption.
The massive assumption. And I am arguing that Ye Wenjie fell into the tragic, naive trap of scientism. She foolishly projected her own desperate idealism onto an unknown alien force and dangerously conflated technological mastery with moral superiority.
Well, and I am arguing that her decision was not naive in the slightest. Rather, it was a highly rational, calculated gamble. I mean, it was born from overwhelming empirical evidence that humanity was irredeemably broken, and that an external intervention was literally the only logical move left to save us from ourselves.
Okay, let's start by looking at the moment she actually defends this choice, which happens years later during her interrogation. The logic she presents there is just staggering.
I think it's mathematically consistent.
Mathematically consistent? She's asked directly why she thought the Trisolarans would reform and perfect human society, and her response is basically this weird equation in her head. She says, if they can cross the distance between the stars to come to our world, their science must have developed to a very advanced stage.
Which is true.
Sure, but then she follows it up with, a society with such advanced science must also have more advanced moral standards. And when the interviewer presses her on whether she actually knew anything about Trisolaran culture or politics, she admits she knew absolutely nothing.
But you have...
Wait, let me finish this thought. She made an unfounded, breathtaking leap of faith. She took the failed political utopianism that ravaged her youth and merely swapped it out for a technological utopianism. She fundamentally assumed that knowing how to build an interstellar warp drive somehow grants you an innate understanding of right and wrong.
Okay, but you're calling it a leap of faith, and I think you are totally isolating that quote from the rigorous, lifelong data set she had actually been compiling about human behavior.
A data set based entirely on her own trauma.
No, look at the baseline she was working from. Think about her firsthand empirical observations during the Cultural Revolution. She didn't just witness a political movement, she watched the brutal murder of her own father.
Right, a physics professor.
Exactly. Beaten to death by his own fanatical students because basic scientific equations were suddenly deemed ideologically impure. And then she's betrayed by her own mother. Then she's betrayed again by a journalist she thought she could trust. Every single social contract she ever observed had catastrophically failed.
Which proves my point. Her sample size was entirely localized. It was limited to a specific, highly traumatic political upheaval. That's not science.
But her sample size expanded. You're forgetting the radar base.
When she is stationed at that remote Red Coast base, she reads Rachel Carson's Silent Spring.
Okay, yes, the environmental book.
Right, a book that exposes the devastating effects of industrial pesticides on the global environment. And suddenly she realizes, oh, the West is doing the exact same thing. She looks through that ecological lens and she sees that humanity's destruction of the natural world is entirely indistinguishable from the ideological madness she survived in China.
I mean, there are different mechanisms, though.
To her, the mechanism is identical. It's humans consuming and destroying everything in their path with zero regard for the future. Her baseline assessment of human nature wasn't a cynical, emotional bias. It was objectively sitting at zero. Humanity had proven repeatedly on a global scale that it could not fix itself. So reaching out to the cosmos wasn't some blind leap. It was a calculated triage on a dying planet.
But triage implies a medical understanding of the cure. You don't just inject a random chemical into a dying patient and hope it works. Let's unpack the actual mechanism of her assumption here.
Go ahead.
She assumes technological advancement inherently requires moral advancement. That is the literal definition of the fallacy of scientism. The mechanism of science is strictly instrumental.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning it tells you how to do something, not why or if you should do it. Science tells you how to split an atom. It is entirely agnostic on whether you should use that knowledge to build a nuclear reactor to power a city or a nuclear bomb to level one.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Assuming a species with advanced interstellar travel has advanced ethics is like assuming a society with the sharpest, most technologically advanced swords is automatically the most peaceful.
That's a fun analogy, but
It's an accurate analogy. She was a brilliant physicist, absolutely. But she abandoned the scientific method the absolute second she turned to alien sociology. She was deeply traumatized, and because humans are biologically hardwired to seek a parental figure or, a higher power to make sense of chaos, she just invented a god. And she shaped that god like a technologically superior alien.
I think that entirely dismisses the statistical and evolutionary logic behind her assumption this wasn't just a blind hope in sharp swords. You have to think about the great filter concept.
The Fermi paradox idea?
Exactly. So, for the audience, if a species survives long enough to cross the stars, which is a process requiring millions of years of uninterrupted, cumulative technological progress, it strongly implies they haven't destroyed themselves along the way.
Right.
Now look at humanity in her era. We were ravaging the biosphere, we were pointing thousands of nuclear warheads at each other and actively suppressing basic scientific truth. We were on a fast track to self-annihilation.
Sure, we were a mess. No argument there.
So for an alien species to successfully navigate those monumental existential threats and actually become an interstellar civilization, one could very rationally hypothesize that they must have mastered their own self-destructive impulses.
That's a huge must.
But logically, they must have established a stable, rational, perhaps highly moral social order. Otherwise, they would have burned out in a nuclear fire long before they ever built a single-generation ship. In that framework, her logic isn't a religious leap. It's an extrapolation based on the prerequisites for long-term species survival.
Okay, but survival of the fittest doesn't stop at the atmosphere. Surviving the great filter doesn't mean you become peaceful. It might just mean you are the most ruthlessly efficient predator in your entire star system. And, she actually gets to test this theory.
Right, with the Earth Trisolaran organization, the ETO.
Exactly. If her gamble was so incredibly rational, let's look at the results of that experiment. She invites this alien presence to Earth to act as a moral guide, but the organization she founds immediately splinters. It gets completely hijacked by the Adventists, who are led by the billionaire Mike Evans.
Evans was an extremist, yes.
He didn't want humanity reformed. He believed humans were a biological plague, and he wanted pure, unadulterated eradication. Her attempt to bring a pristine technological salvation to humanity just birthed a new breed of fanatical, anti-human terrorists.
I think you're misplacing the blame there.
How? She thought she was introducing a gentle gardener to prune the weeds of human society. Instead, she introduced an invasive apex predator that decided to burn the entire ecosystem to the ground. Her complete inability to foresee that human beings would immediately corrupt her movement proves her fundamental lack of foresight.
Wait, notice what you just said, though. You are blaming Ye Wenjie for the actions of Mike Evans. You are completely conflating Evans's radicalism with Ye Wenjie's original intention.
Because she gave him the platform.
But she was never a hardcore Adventist. She never wanted the eradication of humanity. Her stated goal from the very beginning was reformation. She recognized a terminal disease in human nature and she sought an external cure. And frankly, the fact that humanity immediately corrupted the ETO into a doomsday cult, that actually validates her original data.
Oh, come on.
It does. It proves her exact thesis that humanity was utterly incapable of moral elevation on its own.
Okay, validating her pessimism doesn't validate her solution. It just means she handed a loaded interstellar weapon to the exact people she was trying to stop.
Let's test that logic then.
Let's look at how she reacts when the Trisolarans finally reveal their true nature. Because to me, this is the hallmark of a rational, scientific mind. A naive zealot doubles down on dogma when they are challenged, right? But eventually, the Trisolarans send a message to the ETO, referring to humans literally as bugs.
Yes, a horrifying realization,
And more importantly, they deploy the Sophons.
which completely dismantled her dream. The Trisolarians literally unfold subatomic protons into multidimensional supercomputers, and they shoot these Sophons at Earth to act as spies.
Right, to watch us.
Not just to watch, their primary function is to physically interfere with our particle accelerators. They deliberately scramble the results of our quantum physics experiments. They effectively lock human science in a cage so we can never technologically advance enough to fight back.
Exactly. And the moment that happens, the exact moment the Trisolarians fire those Sophons and actively sabotage our scientific progress, her perception shifts immediately.
Well, she didn't have much of a choice.
But she doesn't rationalize the abuse. She doesn't stay blindly devoted to them like some cult leader. She processes the new data and realizes her initial hypothesis was incorrect. The Trisolarians are not moral saviors. They are conquerors. She accepts the empirical reality of the failure of her experiment.
Experiment? You cannot seriously call this an experiment. The scale of the failure is way too absolute. Yes, she realizes her error, but the fact that her ultimate regret stems from discovering the Trisolarians are just another aggressive civilization participating in a brutal universe, that proves my core point.
How so?
Her initial thesis was a catastrophic cognitive bias. An experiment implies controlled variables. It implies acceptable risks. She risked the existence of the entire human species without their consent, and she did it because she mapped her personal localized trauma onto the entire cosmos. That is profoundly unscientific.
What was the alternative? You keep acting as if there was some safe, viable option sitting on the table.
The safe option is not inviting aliens to conquer us.
Let's look at this to the lens of ecology and triage again. From her vantage point, observing the relentless deforestation, the political purges, the absolute cruelty humans were inflicting on each other, and the biosphere, humanity was a terminal patient. The safe route you're implying was just sitting quietly and waiting for the disease to run its fatal course.
But triage requires the consent of the patient. She made a unilateral decision for billions of people who had absolutely no say in the matter.
Because she was the only one sitting in the room with the transmitter. The burden of action fell entirely on her shoulders. When you are the only one holding the radio and the ship is sinking while the crews slaughter each other, sending out an SOS to an unknown ship isn't a betrayal of agency. It is literally the only rational choice left.
I just can't agree with that framing.
Let me add to that, because I really want to push back forcefully on the idea that she abandoned her scientific rigor. Because if she was purely blinded by trauma and naive idealism, how do we explain her final, most pivotal contribution to the story?
You mean her conversation with Luigi?
Yes. Long after she realizes the Trisolarans are hostile, she meets with the sociologist Luigi, and she passes on to him the foundational axioms of what she calls cosmic sociology.
Right. The two axioms being, first, survival is the primary need of any civilization. Second, civilizations continuously grow and expand, but the total matter in the universe remains constant.
Exactly. And from those two incredibly simple, cold, mathematical axioms, the entire concept of the dark forest universe is born. She deduces that because of the vast distances between stars, communication is too slow to ever build true trust.
The chain of suspicion.
Right. It creates an unbreakable chain of suspicion. Therefore, every civilization in the universe must act like an armed hunter stalking through a dark forest. If you see any exposed life, the only logical move to ensure your own survival is to shoot first.
Yes, the dark forest theory.
By conceptualizing this, Ye Wenjie proves she retained her intensely rational, analytical mind. When her initial hypothesis failed, she didn't just despair. She deduced the true, brutal game theory of universal survival, and she deliberately handed humanity the exact intellectual tools it needed to defend itself. She armed the terminal patient. That is the act of a cold, calculating scientist.
Okay, the formulation of cosmic sociology is brilliant, undeniably. But it serves as the ultimate tragic irony of her character, and I actually think it completely reinforces my position.
Reinforces it? How?
Because she is capable of that level of cold, clear-eyed Darwinian deduction at the end of her life. But decades earlier, sitting at the control console of the Red Coast base, she utterly failed to apply that same rigorous sociological thinking to the universe.
She didn't have the data yet.
She had the logic. If survival is the primary need and resources are finite, then any arriving alien force is inherently coming for your resources, not to teach you morality. By the time she figures out the actual rules of the game, she has already flipped the board and invited the predator into the house. It just highlights that her initial decision was a massive deviation from her normally rigorous logic. She assumed advanced science somehow bypassed the basic laws of Darwinian survival.
But you are demanding that she should have solved the mathematical game theory of the entire universe before she even had a single data point proving the universe was populated.
I'm demanding basic caution when dealing with an unknown species.
Look, when she first sent the signal, the silence of space was the prevailing data point. But let's look at the actual sequence of events here. The very first reply she received wasn't a fleet of warships.
It was a warning.
Exactly. It was a desperate warning from a lone Trisolaran pacifist, explicitly telling her not to respond, warning her that her world would be conquered.
Which is exactly my point. She received an explicit, empirical warning that the Trisolaran civilization would invade and conquer Earth. She knew the risk was absolute. She pressed the button anyway. She literally broadcasts back, "Come here, I will help you conquer this world." That is a staggering surrender of human agency driven by sheer resentment.
It is a surrender. But it is a calculated surrender when you believe the alternative is humanity surviving just long enough to torture itself to death. You argue she mapped her personal trauma onto the cosmos. I argue she accurately identified an objective pattern.
A pattern of human cruelty?
Yes. The Cultural Revolution wasn't just a personal slight, it was a systemic collapse of societal rationality. Silent Spring wasn't just a sad book. It was empirical evidence of biological self-destruction. Her data set was incredibly robust. And, the pacifist warning actually proved something crucial to her.
That they were hostile?
No. It proved that there were individuals with high morality out there in the stars. It wasn't a total failure of logic to hope that the broader civilization that produced that pacifist might possess the structural order necessary to fix Earth. When she formulated cosmic sociology at the end of her life, it wasn't a repudiation of her scientific method. It was the evolution of it.
It was a little too late for evolution.
But think about the steps. She formed a hypothesis, advanced tech equals advanced morals. She ran the experiment she called the aliens. The results came back. Aliens are actually hostile predators. So she revised the theory into cosmic sociology. That is the scientific method incarnate.
I mean, if we excuse her actions as just running an experiment, we lose the ethical grounding of science entirely. We are talking about the potential extinction of the human race. Ye Wenjie's foundational error was a tragic conflation of scientific mastery with moral enlightenment. She believed that mastering the physical laws of the universe would somehow bestow ethical perfection upon a species.
A utopian hope, maybe.
Right. And that is the core fallacy of technological morality. It's the belief that building a faster microchip or a better warp drive inherently makes you a better person. It doesn't. And because she was blinded by the trauma of her past, she literally bet the existence of the entire human race on that flawed equation.
Well, I think the fundamental disagreement here is whether her assessment of humanity was a flawed emotional bias or an accurate empirical measurement. Her gamble, while terrifying and obviously ultimately disastrous, was the most rational move available to a mind that had accurately measured the utter failure of human morality.
Even if it meant total annihilation.
From the political purges that murdered her family to the environmental devastation laying waste to the biosphere, she saw that humanity lacked the internal capacity for a moral awakening. We were a closed system, spiraling into entropy. She reached outside the system for a lifeline, And yes, she pulled in a dark forest instead of an enlightened utopia, but she also possessed the intellectual fortitude to diagnose that dark forest and hand the cure, the rules of the game, down to the next generation so they could fight the war she started.
So, to pull this all together, we've explored two vastly different readings of Ye Wenjie's fateful decision today. On my side, we see a brilliant scientist who fell victim to the fallacy of technological morality. Her traumatic experiences during the Cultural Revolution blinded her, leading her to naively conflate advanced alien technology with advanced moral superiority. She projected her desperate need for salvation onto the stars, ignoring the fundamental Darwinian realities of survival, and recklessly endangered the entire human species based on a cognitive bias.
And from my perspective, we see a rational actor working with an overwhelmingly negative data set. Her experiences from political violence to global ecological destruction provided empirical evidence that humanity was on a path to inevitable self-destruction. In that context, her decision to contact the Trisolarians wasn't a naive leap of faith, but a calculated triage. Even though the outcome was disastrous, her ability to lead or deduce the brutal axioms of cosmic sociology proved she maintained her rigorous analytical mind until the very end, ultimately giving humanity the tools to survive the threat she summoned.
Regardless of which interpretation you lean toward, I think there is a clear convergence here. Her actions had absolutely catastrophic consequences for humanity. The narrative of the three-body problem brilliantly uses Ye Wenjie to illustrate a profound danger. It shows us the sheer peril of mapping human desires, whether for salvation, for justice, or for meaning, right onto the cold, indifferent reality of the cosmos.
It truly is a breathtaking exploration of the absolute limits of human morality when placed against the backdrop of an immoral, vast, and completely silent universe.
It suggests there is so much more to explore in this material for anyone who wants to weigh the ultimate cost of technological idealism. Because in the end, when we look up at the night sky, we aren't looking at a mirror. We are looking into a void. And the most terrifying thought isn't that something might be looking back, it's that whatever's looking back doesn't care about our morality at all.
A chilling thought to leave on.
Thank you for joining us.